You're listening to author Jason Lee Willis read The Alchemist Stone. This is Part 5, The Dominus de Artois. Chapter 46, Montreal, New France. Pierre Lemoyne stopped and stood in wonder as a sniper in a turret took aim at him. Apparently, I need to find a higher level of personal ambition. The sniper didn't bother him, though. In front of Pierre, a stone European-styled castle stood where the Lemoyne log cabin had once been, with 4 turrets on the corners that reached just a bit higher than the 3-story roof. The castle had second-floor windows that not only made Charles's residence the grandest in New France, but also made it a fort for all the residents on the southern shore of the St. Lawrence River. His brother's Longueuil estate also had a chapel, a guardhouse, a massive granary as large as the main house, a horse stable, and a barn for the cattle. Only the old barn remained from the original land grant. His sloop docked next to a dozen other boats and ships in front of the riverside estate. Far across the river on the island of Montreal, military ships were anchored. War has finally come, just as Father warned us. Charles is obviously prepared to outlast any foe. Pierre was immediately greeted by his brother's servants, who were given instructions about treatment of his crew. The youngest Lemoyne brothers bolted through the gates of the estate in full sprint. "Antoine, you've grown so big," Pierre said as he lifted the 5-year-old. Jean-Baptiste, now 8, also grinned at the naval uniform and saluted. Pierre tousled his hair. At the fort gate, an unexpected face patiently waited. "How long ago did Jacques get here?" Pierre asked. "Just a few days ago," Jean-Baptiste explained as they walked across the big yard. "Then something has happened on the frontier." The smile of returning home left his face. Many of the household servants of his youth had shifted from the estate at Ville-Marie, but even this could not lighten his mood. "What in the world are you doing here?" "Plotting our revenge," Jacques said coldly. "We've been betrayed." Jacques went on to explain how their trading post agent was framed, and troops at Fort de Bois had been replaced by La Hautan's Marines. "Is Bishop Laval behind this?" "Possibly. He's got our man in prison on trumped-up charges, but it's the Baron of La Hautan that has everyone worried. And there's matters from the south, but you've got to hear this from the others." A few minutes later, the 7 eldest Lemoynes gathered around a long table with all the drinks and refreshments they'd need. It was a private war council for the Order of Eos. Unlike their father, Charles Jr. had a meticulously clean-shaven face and wore all the trappings of a gentleman, despite the family fortune being made through fur trade. "I believe our family's position as the western arm of the Order of Eos is in jeopardy, and soon a global war will begin such as the world has never seen." "And the angel cracked the 7th seal," Paul said in ensuing silence. "And there will be a triple winter, and Fenris broke his bonds," Joseph added with a grin, bringing chuckles from Louis. "Shut your blasphemous mouths, both of you." Charles smashed his fist on the table, shaking plates and glasses. "I brought you here as men, and you will behave as men." Despite his temper, Charles was still the most delicate and needed a moment to rub his hand. "Matters in the East continue discreetly, but here in the West, matters are grave. Even though England is on the brink of civil war, their colonies are growing stronger by the day. Pierre, tell your brother the news." "If my news is not the worst, then what else has happened?" Pierre nodded and let out his breath before beginning. "English colonists have pushed back into Acadia, threatening the fishing posts. While it could be seen as petty vengeance or financial disruption, I believe those are distractions and an excuse to claim the vault. I believe the Priory of Ormus is aggressively panicking after our push into the west and taking a stab in the dark where it can. Charles built on the point. The civil war I spoke of will come between the Catholic heir James Stuart and the Protestant heir Mary. If Mary is made Queen of England, and our Catholic King Louis will support the opposition, the disruption in Arcadia is only the beginning. Jacques, tell your brothers what happened in the West. Jacques told the same story Pierre had heard at the gate, about Gaspar's treachery, Paul Bonjean's arrest by the Jesuits, and Captain d'Arcy being appointed to the post. But this time he brought up a new name, Colin Nain. He's an engineer that was hired by LaSalle to build our southern stronghold, and he accompanied LaSalle's brother, the Sulpician priest, on our return trip to Montreal. Why would LaSalle send away his fort builder? The question lingered in the air. Disaster? Along with Delhut, LaSalle was the third prong of the Order of Eos's trident in the west. The Lemoynes were the strong center, with Delhut in the north and LaSalle in the south. Did you question him? Repeatedly, but the answers were always vague. Father Cavalier was no better. Both of them seemed to be hiding some dark secret. Agents of Priory of Ormus? Rats fleeing a sinking ship, Pierre offered. Which is why I gathered all of us together. If war is coming, we need to stand together rather than finding ourselves scattered to the wind. We act on behalf of the order, then our family, then Montreal, and then France. Until we hear from St. Clair or Alvarez, we make every decision in this room. We've long known the thieving Jesuits are our enemy, which is why we cannot fully trust our king. For generations, the Priory of Ormus has been toothless, which is evident in their interest in Arcadia. However, I believe another ancient enemy has been at work. Joseph. Tell us what you've learned. Joseph. Now 20, the boy had become a man during his years of service. Of course, he was our spy. Joseph scratched at his dirty blond beard, golden on the sides and stained dark below his mouth. Darcy is the smartest man I've ever been around, which is why he is a dangerous snake. He can fabricate lies as easily as he can speak languages or develop war plans. Yet the strangest thing about him is his compassion. Compassion? Jacques blurted out. Yes, compassion. I studied him closely as Father commanded. Yes, the Baron of Lahontan was involved in the capture of the Iroquois Sachem, but he also protected them from torture by the vengeful natives and traders. On numerous occasions, he ranted and raved about how the native was our brother and equal. For this reason, he took Chief Gaspar as his private aide and relegated me to menial administrative tasks. The longer I stayed with the man, the more the jovial womanizers seemed to be a role he played. Then he's an agent of Bishop Laval, Jacques answered, which is why Bonjean was arrested. That was my first thought, Charles said, but tell the others about his interactions with the Jesuits. Lahontan knows every word in the Bible, and he frequently uses verses against the policies of the Jesuits. He openly despised any Jesuit priest he encountered, and on one occasion, I believe he allowed several of them to wander into an Iroquois trap, and then refused to act, allowing them to be burned at the stake. The mystery of Baron Lahontan, Charles said with an eye roll. There is an ancient saying, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, even though I do not know who said it. Bishop Laval, Joseph said, getting smirks from his brothers. Paul, the scholar of the group, answered softly. It's from the Artois. This time the brothers broke out laughing. What's so funny? Paul asked angrily. You asked me to research ancient Indian cultures, and I did. Francois shook his head. Joseph is learning about the American Indian, and Paul is learning about Punjab and Tibet. Classic Paul. Charles did not smile. It takes more than military might to win a war, and scholarship might be the key for us. So while Paul prepares our family by studying the distant past, I've dug into the recent past. Long before the Jesuits were created, before the Templar era, before the splitting of the Elm, the Order of Eos had an ancient enemy, an organization known simply as the Periphery. According to the legends I read in our family library, it has been an enemy to the Order of Eos since the days of the Dawn. The few agents who have been captured and tortured for information have claimed to be a Christian secret society, but there is information that contradicts this, making it far older than Christianity. If Lahatan is an agent of the Periphery, then it would explain his antagonism with both Eos and the Jesuits. We must be wary of him. Jacques cleared his throat. So, his move against Bonjean might be a distraction? Could you explain the chaos of secret names? Francois asked. Could you explain this chaos of secret names? Francois asked. Who is Bonjean? On our trip back, I spoke to him about it. It's true. He is the lost heir of Artois, Pierre Charles Le Sueur. Bishop Laval had witnesses against him who knew him when he first came over from France as a boy. He was conscripted as a don of the Jesuits, as a translator, which makes sense with all of his dealings at the post at St. Ignace. He was assigned to Father Marquette. Hold on. The priest killed by St. Clair? Yes, but he was building an outpost at Chicago when it happened. How could he know we sent St. Clair to stop Marquette? He changed his name, didn't he? Yes, but that was to avoid the Jesuits, not us. He's been minding his own business out there on Lake Michigan for half of his life now. Everybody out there knows him as Paul Bonjean, one of the most powerful warriors and shrewdest minds in the region. I honestly love the man. Joseph chuckled. He had a Sioux wife, Joseph. You're the one who's not married. Charles interrupted. A Sioux wife. That could be useful to Delhut. Do you trust this man, Jacques? I know he's not an ally of the Jesuits, if that concerns you. If he was lurking in the shadows, waiting for revenge, why didn't he act when I showed up? I do trust him, and we obviously can't trust Darcy and Gaspar. Pierre liked the sound of the plan. Like you said, Charles, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. If Laval and Darcy plot against him, perhaps we could use Le Sueur for our purposes. Charles shook his head. We have men we can trust for such purposes. I don't need more warriors. I need Jacques back at Fort Dubois. I agree we should be cautious about Le Sueur, but if we can help clear him of these charges, he could be a great asset for us in the West, especially if he knows the Sioux. What do you suggest, Pierre? If war breaks out, we might need Jacques here with us. He's our best field general and should take Francois under his wing immediately. I can find replacements for Joseph and Louis in the French fleet. This will ensure our survival of our family here in the center, allowing Le Sueur to be our new weapon in the West. Our family must stay together, and if we are to vet Pierre Charles Le Sueur, I think it is a job for our cousins. The brothers chuckled and grinned, including Charles, though he again quickly lost his smile. You're serious, aren't you? It will take more than might to win this war, Pierre answered. Chapter 47. 1,000 miles upstream from Montreal, at the cabin built by Lesueur, Captain D'Arcy and Chief Gaspar sat in chairs once filled by Winona and Bon Jean. They propped their feet up as they read by lantern and fireplace. "We should throw all of these maps and notes in the fire," Gaspar suggested. "I agree, but I want to study all of these for a few more days before burning them and the cabin down to the ground." "Just the cabin?" D'Arcy laughed. "Perhaps for now, but when you and I return from our little trip, we'll consider burning down more." "What little trip are we taking?" D'Arcy pointed to a sketch showing the River of Death and a strange mound. "Makato, if I've read it correctly. You and I are going to start a war." Chapter 48. Montreal, New France, 1688. Lesueur waited in a warm, comfortable jail cell in Montreal while the truth was slowly collected. The pace of justice was so slow that it gave him time to ponder the next phase of his revenge. The Jesuits arrested Pierre-Charles Lesueur, but they murdered Paul Bon Jean. And Father Marquette? His mentor had been in the ground for 13 years now, so as cold as his pledge to God to avenge him. Marquette had been killed by those trying to stop him from finding the Philosopher's Stone, and after Lesueur immersed himself in the fur trade, leads had finally come, yet left him unable to do anything about them. And Winona. He pictured her pleading to her father, Waukesha, to forestall his judgment against the fur traders. Lesueur had halted trade to give her time to work her diplomacy, but now that he was gone, traders would try to make as much money as fast as they could. If she succeeded in convincing her father, Lesueur would be absent for her return. And D'Arcy. It was all the Baron's fault. But Lesueur also saw how Gaspar manipulated him. Executing the Iroquois had made him a murderer, and for his sins, his station had been taken away. But the final nail in the coffin had been the connection of Bon Jean to Lesueur. And Philip Dubois. The river guide escorted Marquette to La Rochère, but vanished after the poisoning. If that had been his true identity, the river guide certainly would have shown up somewhere. Instead, Lahoughton held a drawing from Dubois, sealing his arrest. If Dubois and Lahoughton were allies, then it could only mean that... "My, you are a monster of a man," a young woman said, peeking down the row of cells. Another young woman stepped behind her, observing from behind her shoulder. Lesueur stepped to the corner of his cell and sat down below the window. The young woman spoke with the warden about some sort of act of service, as they called it. There were 6 cells, and the young women hoped to minister to each criminal. Instead of focusing on his revenge or Winona's rescue, he found himself in an even greater state of agitation as he listened to the innocent, naive banter of teenage girls. By the time they stood in the cell in front of his cell, Lesueur knew all he needed to know about Clementine and Marguerite Messier. The daughters of a wealthy Montreal merchant took it upon themselves to provide Christian charity to those in greatest needs. And from the way Father Manthet fawned all over them, their father's financial patronage outweighed their mother's Sulpician leanings. "You're the Lord Lesueur, aren't you?" Clementine Messier said as she slid her stool to his cell. "You don't even need to tell me your sins. I've read all about you. You're the mighty lumberjack Bon Jean who kills Indians with his axe like he's chopping down trees. The newspapers make it sound like you're a monster, but you just need a barber." "Can we pray for you?" the younger sister Marguerite asked. "I need all the help I can get," Lesueur said, refusing to look at them. "Just as with other prisoners, the young blonde stuck to the ministering, while the older, bolder sister conversed with the prisoner. When Marguerite finished her prayers, Clementine continued. It must be exciting living in savage lands, she said, with no reaction. So she tried again. I've heard you are rich. Why would you live out on the frontier when you could have an estate in France? Lord Lesueur? No. I am the bear man. I am Wishwe. My brother is the rich one. My wealth is only in beaver pelts. Oh, there's that wealth, too. A decade of money sitting in your account. It must make you angry that the Jesuits are trying to claim it all now. Your older brother has passed away, Marguerite softly explained. Disease left you only your sister-in-law. Her attorney came to Montreal looking for you 2 years ago. You are the heir of Artois. Come, Clementine said, dragging her stool to the next cell. The great bear man of the Great Lakes does not want to be bothered. My brother's dead? 2 decades earlier, his father passed. His older brother decided Artois was not big enough for the two of them, so he sent him to New France to make a name for himself. Instead of paying for shelter and passage, he'd been forced to sign a conscription with the Jesuits, making him a Don, an oath he broke in order to keep another oath he made to Marquette. I came here to make a name for myself and ended up as Lord Lesueur after all. Perhaps this is God's way of telling me that I'm not the Wishwe. Winona is out on the prairie, and I'm in a prison cell. So much for her prophecy. Just as the Messier girls were about to leave, a knock came on the door, followed by a familiar voice. Jacques Lemoyne. So? Jacques asked after speaking to the warden. I thought he'd be bigger, Clementine said. Prison has that effect on a man. Give your mother my love. Now run along. I must speak with my friend about legal matters. Chapter 49. Montreal, New France, 1688. Pierre-Charles Lesueur almost growled at the girl. So where's your sister? Courting a clock merchant, Marguerite Messier said, looking at her toes. She thinks she's in love, so she forgets all about her service to the Lord, leaving me to finish the work. A few feet behind her, the Jesuit warden watched his favored guest. Can I pray with you again? You don't have enough time to pray for all of my sins, Lesueur said. But she nevertheless prayed. Lesueur glanced at her, paying attention this time. Her hair, tucked and tied back, still shone like golden sun. Her face angelic and perfect. Beneath her layers of expensive clothing, a slender woman, but too young. Lesueur walked to the window, looking out where he could see the descending rooftops, but not the river beyond. Is it true you had a wife out on the frontier? A Sioux woman? Marguerite asked once her prayers finished. Her name was Winona, but she was not my wife, not in a traditional sense. Then in what sense? Lesueur turned to see if the young woman was serious. You're too young to understand. It might surprise you. Father is one of the wealthiest merchants in Venice, where men outnumber women almost 10 to 1. I could have my pick of any boy along the St. Lawrence, yet here I am with the bear man of the big woods, a man amongst boys. You want to return to her, don't you? I saved her from the Fox Indians, who took her as a slave, and I'll let you ponder what that means in that pretty little blonde head of yours. Winona was my trade partner, who provided valuable insight into the greatest nation west of the Mississippi. So yes, I want to return as quickly as I can before disaster ruins all we've built. I am told she was beautiful. Who's been telling you these things, Lemoyne? Jacques has been negotiating with Bishop Laval about your release. I've listened to some of the conversations, yes. And he's your cousin. Yes, my mother was Lemoyne. I am the child of 2 feuding houses. Do you know how long they are planning on detaining me? until they know what to do with you. So they sent you to spy on me. Marguerite grinned broadly and nodded. But I want to know about the beautiful Winona of the Sioux. Why was she not a wife in a traditional sense? Did you receive a wound during battle? LeSueur dismissed the notion with a bah. I've been wounded, but I served a great man named Jacques Marquette when I was no older than you are now. As he was dying, I swore an oath to take his place as a man of God. While I am no priest, I chose to live as a Nazarite. Do you know what a Nazarite is? I remember hearing the priest talk about him. Isn't it a pledge to never drink alcohol, eat a certain type of food, and to never let a razor touch your head, like John the Baptist? Exactly. While I took Winona into my home, we were never fully man and wife. Didn't Marquette die before I was born? Isn't your oath to this dead priest fulfilled? I still have unfinished business. But I'm a fool for continuing. Would I have to kill the entire Lemoyne family to get vengeance for Father Marquette? How do I become the Wishwe without the guidance of Winona? Young Marguerite continued to study him. So if you were released, you'd want to go back west. If I am the Wishwe. There will soon be a great war in the west, and if I can find Winona, I believe it can be averted. There is already a great war building in the east. My brothers are all preparing for war, either by land or sea. You should stay and fight here. You could protect me while my cousins are away. Father Marquette and Winona filled my mind with fables, yet a prison cell is my reality. Is this the legend of Wishwe come to life? As long as I am in jail, there is no choice, is there? Now, run along, Mademoiselle Messier. Enjoy your youth while you can. Chapter 50. While Pierre-Charles LeSueur sat in a comfortable Jesuit prison cell, Louis Armand de Lame d'Arcy and his men spent an uncomfortable day hiding under the protection of shrubs and bushes of the Yoncalo River. By the time dusk arrived, the Baron of Lahatan had a pretty good understanding of where they were in comparison to LeSueur's drawings. A few hours of quiet drifting brought them to the confluence of rivers, where a massive bluff rose on the eastern shore. Here, the men got out and quietly scouted the bluff. Gaspar found the blue earth in a great mound just to the east of the bluff, and under the protection of the stars, they all stood reverently in front of it. Darcy looked down, kicking at the sandy flood wash beneath his feet. Now I understand. It would take an expedition with a crew of miners to remove all the sediment. If not properly timed, the waters of the river would rise out of its low banks and flood this whole valley, or the soft walls would collapse. Plus, all this vitriol is just a chemical reaction. Who knows how far below the Alchemist is to be found? So what do we do now? Gaspar asked. Something like this cannot stay hidden. Fate would not allow it. If you mess with fate, matters only get worse. We will do our duty, the will of God instead of the will of men. The doom of man will come soon enough. We'll prevent anyone else from reaching this place for another few centuries. How? We begin by starting a war, Darcy said. Who has the staff? It's back in the canoe, one of the men said. While the Baron waited, he unstrapped the pack he carried. None of the men, including Gaspar, knew what it was. It's a land claim. It's a lead plate issued by the court of King Louis XVI, which I was given for just such a circumstance. With my knife, I etched the day's date, and it already bears my name. I hammer the staff into the ground, place this plate upon it, and all these lands are officially claimed by the Kingdom of France. Here? Gaspar asked. In this cursed place? The guide ran up with the staff, handing it to the Baron. When the Sioux discover it, how will they react? They will see this as an act of war. Gaspar nodded knowingly as the Baron hammered the stake into the ground in front of the vitriol. Exactly, and I would not want to be within 1,000 miles of the Sioux when war does begin, he said, placing the lead plate upon it. Our job is finished here, boys. Let's go home. Chapter 50. As the sun rose and filled Pierre-Charles Lesueur's cell with the glow of late summer, it was not Marguerite Messier who brought him news. It was an old friend. Perrault, Lesueur said, jumping up from his bed to rush to the bars. What are you doing here? I am here to give testimony and straighten out all this mess about illegal trapping and licenses. Have you heard about the Iroquois? I was there the day it began. It was Gaspar, the sneaky old muskrat himself. Well, I'm here once again to deal with my old foes, and while I'm here, I figured I could do my best to help you out with this mess. It was the Baron, too. What Baron? The Baron of Lahatan, Captain Darcy. He somehow knew who I was. He's the one I've been looking for, I know it. He must be connected to the group that killed Father Marquette. So what will it be, Paul or Pierre? Now do you understand why I had to hide for all these years? I've always understood, but I'm also just a simple man. I have to protect my family, don't I? But your motivations are a bit more complicated. If you are released, what will you do? Hunt down this Baron for revenge? He's after something I have, which is why I was arrested so quickly and dragged away. But if he remains out here, I worry that Winona will be in danger. I need to find her before it's too late. I'll go see what it can do before winter comes and prevent either of us from going back. Chapter 51. The Seven Stars Pub, London, November 5th, 1688. Remember the 5th of November. 83 years earlier to the day, the Jesuit plot failed to topple England's Protestant monarchy. Now, a similar controversy again threatened to tear the kingdom apart. James II, a Catholic monarch from the Stuart line, sat on the throne, but his reign had been filled with recent turmoil. Even though the English Parliament was governed by the Church of England instead of the Roman Catholic Church, King James II aggressively made moves in favor of his own Catholic faith. Seeing the Catholic Church and the Catholic nations of Spain and France as the enemy, Protestant leaders had rallied behind another heir, the Anglican Princess Mary, his daughter. With Mary's marriage to a Protestant monarch, William of Orange, who ruled parts of Holland and France, the religious turmoil had come to a boil in September of 1688, when Catholic France went to war with Protestant Holland. The future of England hung in the balance. If nothing was done, France would crush Holland, leaving only England as a global Protestant power. Despite England's advantage in the New World, in Europe its position began to crumble. So on a day celebrated by Catholics as the day they almost took back Parliament from the Anglicans, an army led by William and Mary crossed the Channel and landed in England. Although there would be later rebellions in Scotland and Ireland, in England the support was overwhelming, later to be known as the Glorious Revolution, when James II fled the throne and William and Mary were crowned as monarchs. Once crowned, William and Mary came to the aid of other Protestant nations, beginning what would be known as the 9 Years' War by some, the Grand War of Alliance by others, and in America, King William's War by the colonists. Global war is coming. For Colin Nain, the war had already started the day he joined the crew of La Salle's expedition to the Gulf of Mexico. Now, sitting at the Seven Stars Pub, he raised a mug of ale in celebration to one of the war's first casualties. Moments later, he was joined by Michael Siccar and a nameless hunchback. Like himself, Siccar was an enforcer and spy for the Priory of Ormus, and the hunchback, whose only attribute was his strange Swiss accent, was their handler for one of the most powerful puppet masters in Europe. So, the world does not know LaSalle is dead? The hunchback asked after listening to the tale of the failed expedition. There are certainly suspicions, Nain said, but LaSalle's cowardly brother, Father Cavalier, rightly knew the expedition had been beset by sabotage from the beginning, and ironically, trusted only me and a few other survivors. Right now, he is probably telling the same story in Paris. To whom? The hunchback asked. To Alexander Lehoulier, Siccar added. He's the politician who's been promoting the Lemoyne, Delhut, and LaSalle families in New France. Lehoulier, the Premier General in the court of King Louis, the hunchback said, showing that despite his physical limitations, his mind was keen. That makes sense. There have been rumors that Lehoulier is a practicing alchemist, which explains his interest in the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. What about this Delhut fellow? Can the Order of Eos reach the end of the rainbow from the north? If the Mississippi River is indeed the metaphoric rainbow, Nain cautiously began, then it seems as if he was poised and ready for some sort of dramatic move in the north. However, when I passed through the Great Lakes a few months ago, it was in chaos. The Order of Eos, it seems, has kicked the hornet's nest, and the tribes of the frontier are destabilizing any western expansion. Good, the hunchback said. We need time for our new king and queen to understand the importance of America. As long as England and France remain at war, progress in the West should halt. The hunchback took a solitary drink from his mug, swallowing 3 gulps before setting the beverage down. As you know, we've been sent to set the Priory of Ormus upon a new path. The elders seek new leadership for the challenging days to come, a task for which I am publicly ill-suited. Siccar, we need you to keep a close watch on our new court, looking for allies and enemies. Here it comes, Nain thought. Where will I die? Madeira? Madagascar? Paris? Nain, luck appears to be on your side. The plans I had for you no longer seem practical. Your loyalty to the Cavalier brothers will soon be known, but we must not appear too desperate. You will be traumatized by your experiences in the New World, and your feigned drinking problems will lend you to share your tales in bars and taverns in La Rochelle. I'm going to France. You make a better Frenchman than an Englishman. Your dedication to the Priory is noted, and perhaps you may sit on your bar stool for the duration of this war. But I will need you to be ready. Ready for what? When the war eventually ends, if England is not in possession of the continent, the Order of Eos will move quickly. It will need funds, resources, and a trusted, skilled engineer. When Lehoulier and Eos prepare to make the next step, I want you to be right under his nose. I'll try not to grow too fat and old, Nain mused. The hunchback picked up his mug and finished his ale. Then it is settled. Siccar will remain here in London. Nain will go to the port of La Rochelle, and I will spend a few months in Cambridgeshire. What's in Cambridgeshire? Neither spy asked the question aloud, but the hunchback could read their minds. If we prevail, we might need our own alchemist to explain things to us. Chapter 51, Fort Antoine, Winter, 1689. Underneath the pile of furs, Lesueur shivered as he stared at the cold ash in the fireplace. Dawn crept from behind the curtain, and as light came, their nightly bit of warmth crept away. Nicholas Perrault, with only his bulbous nose sticking out from his blanket, sat staring at the stack of wood beside the brick. Malcolm Morrison, the ward of the Lemoyne family, reached out a hand toward the pine splinters. "No," Lesueur whispered and cleared his throat. Morrison blinked. "But we are certain to freeze to death. If the Sioux see a line of smoke in the trees, then we are certain to die. We cannot risk any smoke during the day. The others should return today with news. And if they don't, they will," Lesueur said. "They must." For the next few minutes, Lesueur just watched the frost from his breath accumulate on the edge of his blankets. "Was it this cold 3 years ago when you claimed all this territory as part of the Kingdom of France?" Perrault did not laugh, but a few loud crows did laugh at their misery from the treetops. "I think you might be right, Morrison. If I stay huddled under these blankets, I might never get up. Besides, I have to take a piss." Lesueur flung off his 3 heavy pelt blankets, and despite being fully clothed in a fur-lined deerskin jacket, the cold almost took his breath away. Perhaps the Norse were right. How can flames be any worse than a frozen hell? "What are you doing?" Morrison asked when Lesueur grabbed a bow and some arrows leaning against the back wall. "I'm going to find a deer and warm my hands with its blood." "You're lying to yourself if you think anything can survive out in that cold," Morrison added. Perrault only shivered. The cracked wooden door provided no barrier from the frigid cold, yet it somehow gave them psychological protection from the weather. When Lesueur pushed the little door open, the crows jumped off their branches, floating down the frozen Mississippi River below. When they arrived to the Mississippi River 3 days earlier to scout, the channel had been open, allowing the open waters to radiate heat from the form of a foggy mist. But even that had been stolen by the cold front that seemingly allied itself with the English, Iroquois, New Englanders, and the dreaded Sioux. "Winona is out there, somewhere." "Where are you?" Lesueur asked, the cold reaching into his lungs to almost steal the words from his heart. Slipping on his snowshoes and tying on a heavy skirt of pine boughs meant to hide his passage, Lesueur marched off to the north. The bluffs of the Mississippi River rose hundreds of feet above the natural reservoir, which was 2 miles wide and a dozen miles long. When he and Winona passed by 5 years earlier, they were able to see thriving colonies of Sioux all over the shores. Now only drifts of snow moved in the valley below. After a few minutes of movement, he felt warmer despite the pain around his exposed eyes. Frost formed so quickly in his beard that he actually had to break it off so that his breathing would not become restricted. A few miles north of the stone cabin, which the generals back in Montreal believed was Fort St. Antoine, Lesueur approached a bluff that gave rise to a steep cliff facing the westward bend of Lake Pepin. "From that peak I can determine if that is haze or smoke in the distance." It was close to the place where Winona showed him the secret entrance to the long, winding, standing rock river, which led to the Waseca portage to the River of Death. But during the coldest stretch of weather Lesueur had ever felt in his life, no one but crows moved along the Mississippi River. Crows. His focus no longer looked to the west, but to the rocky bluff. Although the eastern slope was skirted in trees, the top and steep western cliff were exposed stone. In the air above the rock, several crows circled, but such a sight was expected as a birch or a snowbank. The scent of cooked pork stopped him dead in his tracks. His heart raced, but now he needed to know. Instead of taking the easier path to the east, he attacked the bluff from the south, finding that his exertion left him warmer than he'd been in days. Finally, after a laborious hour, He could smell the sweet scent drifting upon the northern breeze, and even before his eyes cleared the horizon of the bluff, he could see 3 posts and the source of the roasting flesh. Lesueur looked away from the bodies, ignoring what the crows could not, and taking a moment, glanced to the northwest, where a dozen Sioux teepees camped along the northern shore of Lake Pepin. Too few for a village. They are merely scouts. His eyes turned back to the crisping flesh. None of the 3 men were even identifiable, but he nevertheless knew them as his scouting colleagues. The bitter cold had been an ally, and when it broke, the natives from the dozen teepees would resume the hunt. Once Lesueur reached the bottom of the bluff, he found himself jogging through the snow, despite the numbing effect upon his nose and cheeks. When he came around the bend, his jogging slowed, and his legs turned to jelly as he faced the drawn bows of a Sioux hunting party, which already had Perot and Morrison on their knees. Chapter 53, Maiden Rock, 1689. Malcolm Morrison stopped screaming, and the only sound was the crackle of burning branches beneath his feet. A sacrifice to Inyan, Lesueur observed. The long night approached, and with it either frozen death or burning torment would likely take his life. But first, he'd have to listen to Perot die in the flames. Perot already appeared half dead, but that would soon change once the torch dropped. For the past 2 hours, while Morrison was tortured with flame, Kiaksa, the leader of the scouting party, stood in front of Lesueur's post, quietly interrogating him. Lesueur told him everything, but none of it saved Morrison. The only ally remaining was the frigid cold. In hindsight, Lesueur would have taken a couple arrows, charged the young boys who'd hid behind the trees, and then led them on a chase. Except for Kiaksa and another adult Sioux, the rest of the hunting party were boys. All the warriors are with Chief Waukesha. With night approaching, Kiaksa split his hunting party in half, sending the youngest boys back to the camp ahead of darkness. The remaining men took a break from the torture to eat the remaining dried food in their possession. Years earlier, Winona had curled up bare-breasted in front of the cabin fire, answering all of his questions about Sioux beliefs. Because of this, Lesueur knew that Kiaksa brought him to the bald bluff because rock and stone were sacred to the Sioux. Inyan was a creator god who sacrificed his life to the world, and the exposed bedrock were his bones. Listen to me, Kiaksa. Your sister knew the truth about me. I am the Wishweet, sent by the star to wield the white egg in the battle against Nosol. I risked my life and the lives of my men so that I could do this before the French come and steal it away from you. If you kill me, they will rejoice. But if you kill Perot, your people will suffer. My people, Kiaksa laughed, standing up and resuming his taunting position. We tried to warn you. When I brought those arrows to your post, you blew gunpowder. Now you come back with a handful of men, and I am supposed to be frightened? When my father returns in the spring, we will push the Iroquois, French, and English all the way back to the Atlantic Ocean. The ground will shake with the thunder of hooves, and all will be restored. Unless Winona convinced them of the truth, Lesueur countered. She must have said something to you about the truth. Her mind is poisoned. She was no longer my sister or the daughter of a mighty chief. She was the whore of the French, my enemy. You brought this upon yourself when you sent men to the haunted valley to desecrate our sacred places. I've already told you, we've sent no men to the haunted valley. France prepares for war with the English. We have no men to spare. A metal plate was put on a pole driven into the sacred blue earth. It was a declaration of war, answering our attempts for peace. I had nothing to do with it, I had gone back to Montreal, a prisoner of the French, not as an ally. You are a white man, and my father charged me to guard our borders, which I will do now. Kiaxa took a torch, relit it from the Morrison pyre, and then turned to the other two pyres, occupied by Perrault and Lesueur. Sweet Jesus, have mercy on my wicked soul, Perrault muttered, but Kiaxa walked past him. We will leave this one here, frozen to the post for any other Frenchman that dare enter our territory. If we burn Perrault, no one will know what happened to him. You, however, will only be mourned by my sister. Lesueur watched as the flame of the torch immediately spread onto the greased kindling surrounding him. With the blackened body of Morrison's pyre already snapping and sizzling, all eyes turned to watch the death of the mightiest man on the frontier, and to warm themselves also. His feet, strangely, were beneath the lick of the flames, and the fabric of his pant legs allowed a soothing heat, and wisps of flames began to climb up the fabric until a hole appeared in the fabric, and the hair on his legs curled and wisped away. Lesueur flexed his arms with all his might, but the leather bands were too fresh to rip or break, and his strength amounted to nothing. Lesueur winced as the fire spread into the timbers, bringing the flames even higher. Glancing down, he could feel the heat upon his manhood, but he wasn't ready to die. Instead of using his arms, he used his legs for leverage. The Sioux had obviously misjudged his height, or could not dig a deep enough hole into the frozen earth. Consequently, his feet were planted solidly on the ground. With teeth grit both in rising agony and determination, he pushed backwards on the pole. His feet slid in the frozen earth until they pushed under the wood of the pyre. It took all of his self-control to command his legs to ignore the heat, but they stayed in place long enough to feel a shudder in the wood. With another push from his legs, the pine beam shattered at the base, sending him rolling back into the pyre. For a moment, he felt flames upon his arms and back as the emerging stars spun overhead. A moment later, he felt cold earth against his face. The pine had snapped 2 feet up from the base, and despite still being lashed to the hewn pine, his legs were free. Faster than any of the stunned warriors could even react, Lesueur jumped back to his feet. He almost fell as the imbalanced beam above his head nearly toppled him, but he used his bound arms to balance it. With a Thor-like bellow, he gave his mightiest roar and charged right into the gathered crowd of boys. Several of them tried to grab or stab him, but Lesueur lowered his shoulder to use the pine as a battering ram to smash into his abductors. If there had been a spear on the pine, it would have skewered the closest boy. Instead, he went flying backwards off his feet. With a spin, Lesueur struck the next closest boy, knocking him sideways. Kiaxa's blade came down into Lesueur's shoulder, in the flesh between the scapula and his left socket. But then Lesueur thrust his whole weight into the most serious threat, knocking the warrior off his feet. Together, they rolled on the ground, and as they did, the beam slid forward, over his shoulder, yet leaving cords tied behind his back. Rather than wrestling Kiaxa to the death, Lesueur rose back to his feet and charged Perrault. Even in the low light, he saw an almost clownish expression of terror on Perrault's face as Lesueur put his right shoulder into the man's midsection, breaking the post off at the base. By the time they rose, more boys stood around them, armed but terrified by the monster unleashed. With a weak stab, one came within reach, and Lesueur took a hold of him, tossing him at the advancing Kiaxa, using the boy's 90 pounds as a weapon to again knock the biggest warrior to the ground. From the nearby pyre, he found a club and used it to beat back the 3 closest boys while Perrault staggered to his feet. "On your feet, follow me." Yet his sprint lasted only 30 yards. His flame-blinded eyes had not been able to adjust quickly enough to make sense of the world around him, but he knew by the glow of the setting sun which way to run. Running to the east meant Kiaksa and the boys would be able to regroup, arm themselves, and track them down like a wounded deer in the winter snow. We need a running head start, a lead. All this passed through Lesueur's mind as his churning legs sent him right off the edge of the high granite cliff overlooking Lake Pepin. From the river's edge, the bluff rose 400 feet, and on the western side, it was almost a 100-foot sheer drop. It's better death than being burned alive, Lesueur thought as he fell to the sound of Perrault's screams behind him. Chapter 54. The Chippewa River, 1689. Chief Gaspar stared up at the roof of the Iowa shelter above his head. The strange lodge of cattail leaves not only protected them from the harsh cold, but left the interior temperature far above the freezing mark. Upon his lap rested an ancient wampum. It was unlike any wampum he'd seen before, and the embedded beads were neither clamshell nor cowrie. Its coloration and pattern made it unique upon the whole of the continent, and now it gave him pause that he'd used the special relic for some shelter and food. The sleepy ones, as the Ioways were known, shaved their heads and wore deer-hide caps. Their gray faces wore a mixture of ash and mud that made the warriors look like living ghosts. Yet despite their fierce appearances, the Ioways were a deliberate people and superstitious. Gaspar lifted the wampum and rose to inspect his wounded patients. Perrault had broken both of his legs in the fall from Maiden Rock, and now slept after smoking pain-killing leaves. Thanks to the ingenuity of the Ioways, they'd found metal rods and a pair of hinges from a pioneer wagon that allowed them to create braces that could be strapped to the trader's legs, stabilizing the breaks and providing support until they healed. The other patient did not need the smoke to sleep. Gaspar used a rag to wipe the sweat from the face and the body of his enemy. Pierre Charles Lesueur, Beanpole, Paul Bon Jean Wishwe. 3 of them, at least, were his enemy. But which one is he now? With a mixed scouting party of Ho-Chunk, Kickapoo, Miami, and Ioways, Gaspar had just arrived at the confluence of the frozen Mississippi and Chippewa rivers when he saw the strange sight of a 2-headed giant running upon the ice a few mornings earlier. With Perrault on his back, Lesueur had run for 15 miles over the recently frozen river while being pursued by a band of Sioux. Even though the main force of the Sioux had withdrawn west for the winter, Gaspar put both Frenchmen in a travois and rushed them downstream into Iowa territory. Lesueur's luck had dropped him into a drifted bank of snow below the cliff face, which allowed him to gather Perrault and flee before the Sioux could find a way in the dark to the base of the cliff. Now, his shoulder wound festered and the blisters on his legs turned to pink stockings. Frostbite and physical exhaustion left the giant unconscious. When Lesueur finally woke, his right eye opened to study the wampum belt set in front of him. Several moments of silence followed, broken only by the loud snoring of Perrault on the opposite wall. "Are you friend or foe?" Lesueur finally asked. "I am a defender," Gaspar coyly answered. Lesueur's eyes went back to the wampum. "So, you are one of them? The peacemakers? Considering your bloody ways, I doubt it. What did you do? Kill one of them to acquire that belt?" "It was entrusted to me, but my actions are not the ways of the peacemakers. My actions and choices are only meant to defend the platoon." Your actions got me arrested, taken away in chains. If I'd been in command, things would have been worse. The leader of the Ioways has confirmed to me that the 7 council fires have gathered at Pipestone. And when spring comes, the Lakota will begin crossing over the frozen rivers, looking for any white man they can find. Lakota? The prairie dwellers? They have come on horses, riding from the western lands in such numbers that the eastern tribes have no choice but to let them pass. I've been traveling from tribe to tribe, warning them of the coming slaughter. But your actions have weakened France. Your lies and treachery have enraged the Iroquois. Yes, with the Iroquois attacking in the east and the enraged Sioux attacking from the west, there will not be a trading post or fort left between here and Montreal. The efforts of your French friends will be set back for decades. The Sioux's eyes grew introspective for a moment. The land claim? Once you were removed from Mackinac, the young Baron and I snuck into the heart of the haunted valley, leaving the seal of France at the mound of blue earth. You and that bastard Darcy stole everything from me. The Baron plays a part, as do I. Your French friends, the lying English, the Chippewa, and even the Jesuits all race to possess an object of great power. But none of them understand what it is, what it does, or when it is to be used. Until the time comes, the bastard Baron and I must do our part to defend all humans from the arrogance of men. I am a sincere man of God, like Father Marquette, but even the Jesuits put humanity at risk with their foolish quest. With a groan, Le Sueur unsteadily went from a prone position to a sitting position, leaving him unsteady and dazed. Why did you save my life? When the serpent star appeared, the peacemakers came searching for a man from prophecy. They look for the one who can wield the white egg and unlock the past and future. Even though I do not believe you are the one to do this, I do believe you still have a part to play. It is not time for the prophecies to be fulfilled. And because of this, I did everything I could to prevent our enemies from reaching the haunted valley, delaying a horrible future. While killing you would have bought some time, you are also the only one with enough grace and cunning to keep it from our enemies. Return to the east, and do all you can to stop others from coming. All I want to do is find Winona. No. All you must do is protect Winona. If you treasure her life, then be part of our plan. Fight for the future rather than living for the moment. Can you do that? Chapter 55, Pipestone, 1689. Winona picked up the knife and held it in the glow of the embers. She looked down to the throat of her latest captor, White Raven, and imagined how easy it would be to run the blade against the protruding vein. His hairless chin and hairless chest looked like that of a boy's compared to the thick, hairy chest of Bear Man. He must think I abandoned him, Winona thought of her previous husband. This isn't how it was supposed to end. She rolled off the bed, quickly dressing herself for the cold. Once finished, she took her blue marriage blanket and wrapped it around her shoulders, but kept the new blade, her wedding gift from White Raven, in her hand. Promise me you will spare his life, Winona had pleaded to her father, one of the 49 chiefs gathered for the war council. Promise me you will spare his life, and I will take a husband of your choosing. White Raven was the leader of the Blackfoot band of the prairie dwellers, the Lakota, and despite his age, he commanded one of the fiercest bands of warriors in the coalition. His was the westernmost band of the Lakota, past the Black Hills near a place called Bear Lodge, upon which the first raven supposedly once perched. Bear Lodge would be her home, he had told her, and she would be surrounded by beauty. Having carried out her duty to her father, Winona slipped out of the teepee. For the first time in a week, the air did not crush her throat and lungs with its icy grip. Spring was coming. Even though darkness lingered, she knew the 7 council fires camped by its shapes and shadows. All around the large frozen pool, the 49 chieftains and their families camped. Surrounding that, the vanguards of each chief camped upon the prairie. While some only brought a few dozen men, others brought 100, and in total an army of over 10,000 camped upon the place where the ancient gods once walked. Even though the snow covered the ground, she could see the broken earth on the eastern horizon. Her feet followed the flowing creek, which sustained the coalition with water just as the Yankton hosts sustained the army with buffalo meat. A ridge of red rock, which was the source for their pipestone, ran north to south for almost 3 miles. It is the heart of the earth, Waukesha had once told her. It marks the center of our nation and divides east from west. Her father would be returning east to wage war while she would be taken to her new home, hundreds of miles to the west, where a great lodge of stone still had the claw marks of a monstrous bear. She followed the stream to the place where the water cut through the shelf of stone and the water flowed in the open air, unrestrained by ice. She looked up at the pillar, a column of red stone that stood alone, a few yards removed from the wall. To reach it, she had to carefully climb the eastern shelf, scaling 20 feet from the creek to the top. Once she stood atop the eastern shelf of the continent, she could look out to the column and all the lands of the west. My new home. She leapt, barely having time to land and still stop without tumbling over the edge toward the jagged rocks surrounding the creek. With her blue blanket still wrapped around her shoulders, she situated herself upon the column and began her silent prayers to Inyan, the Creator. By the time dawn came, her young husband, joined by his Blackfoot men, as well as her father's band, found her by tracking her footprints back to the column. "Come down, Winona," White Raven called out to her. "We're worried about you." Just like the northeastern Metawakan had 7 chiefs, so too did the western Lakota. Only in council did she understand the sway her father held, and when he offered his daughter in marriage, alliances were quickly forged. "The French will kill you," she said morosely. "They will kill all of you, and our role as guardian of the frontier will end in failure. I've heard your warnings, but our scouts tell another story. When spring comes, we will sweep over the land of the east, and the thunder of our hooves will pierce the heart of our enemies long before our arrows do. They have guns and cannons. They are few in number," White Raven said. "But first we will sweep away the Iowas, the Meskwaki, the Chippewa, the Potawatomi, the Kickapoo, the Ho-Chunk, the Miami, the Menominee, and the Iroquois. We will drive them back to the sea, forcing them to deal with the French for us. They will wage war, or we will destroy them and do it ourselves. This is not the way of Inyan. This is not why we were chosen for a sacred duty. My father had deaf ears, and his short-sightedness will lead all the white nations to unite against us. I beg you, husband, to speak to the other chieftains." "They desecrated our sacred places," White Raven insisted, repeating the same argument she'd heard for months. "Not only am I Blackfoot, but I have descended from the 5 lodges also. I must uphold the old ways." Did Bear Man go back to the Haunted Valley looking for me? Or did something terrible happen to him? Winona looked down at her blade, knowing it could free her from a life far in the west. She stood looking down at her husband and his rescuers. If she jumped, the rock would likely bring death as well. She held the knife out. If you follow my father into war, you will be the people of the knife instead of the guardians of the frontier, she said, changing the syllable of the word to create two meanings from one, Isayanthi. With an underhanded throw, she tossed the knife to them and watched as they stepped aside from the wedding gift. She jumped. Throwing herself onto the rocks below meant her bearman would have to fight the world without an ally, so she jumped back onto the rocks of the ridge, landing awkwardly but safely. Bearman will have one voice in the wilderness praying for him. Chapter 56. St. Ignace Mission, Spring, 1689. Lesueur folded his arms and didn't say a word as the trio looked at the burnt ruins of St. Ignace. The fort, the church, the trading post, and even Lesueur's cabin were nothing but ash. Still on crutches, Perrault inspected the ashes as if his investigation could somehow undo the total destruction that met them. Chief Gaspar stood fearlessly beside Lesueur as if proudly inspecting his work. "How does this madness benefit your people? They will be defenseless now," Lesueur muttered. "The Sioux will come upon land, upon their swarms of horses," Gaspar said. "My people will weather this storm upon Mackinac Island, and when it is over, the lands will be refreshed like a forest after a fire. The flames of Iroquois aggression will be ended. At the same time, I will have done my sworn duty." "So that traitor Darcy did all of this?" Sir asked. "The Baron is a loyal servant. It took great courage for him to do this. He'll be drawn and quartered when Montreal learns the truth. Even if the forts had stood, the Sioux would have overwhelmed the territory in a matter of weeks," Gaspar defended. "In a way, the Baron saved lives. Bringing the garrisons back east will save French lives. By summer, this destruction will be ascribed to the Sioux, or the English. No one will remember what happened out here." "I will remember," Perrault called out. "That traitor Darcy has left countless young trappers and their families at the mercy of the Sioux, defenseless. I cannot go back to Montreal with you. I have to stay and gather up as many traitors as I can. Gaspar speaks the truth. We'll find a nice island for the summer and hide from the Sioux as they pass to the east." "War is coming to Montreal," Lesueur reminded him. "You've protected my family before, like a great guardian angel. Now I must watch over those that are scattered around the area. I place them in great danger. I'm sure you'll be able to explain that to my wife and daughters." "I understand." Before leaving the St. Ignace Peninsula, Lesueur took a moment to inspect the ruins of his cabin. The fire had burned away the legacy of Paul Bonjean, but left behind an axe head, which he retrieved from the black embers. He also found the tins of blue earth, covered in soot, but otherwise undisturbed. "Did Darcy keep my records of my journey?" Gaspar shook his head. Lahontan tossed it into the fire, but he followed the journey from his memory. He acts like a preening bird, but it is all a show. "My sketches have been burned." "Good. Then Marquette's treasure will still have value." Next, Lesueur and Gaspar traveled together to Mackinac Island, but not to the Bethune village. Instead, they traveled around to the southern corner to a rocky, small alcove. "I came here at night, so none of your people knew I had come," Lesueur explained as he and Gaspar climbed the shell of the turtle. "I learned of this place from the skull priests of the Chippewa, whom Winona told me about. Do you know the skull priests?" "The Ouijigan? Yes, I have heard of them. It was quite a challenge to find one, and then even harder to speak to one who wouldn't kill me. Winona helped me with that. We spoke openly about the prophecies and why they first left their homes along the Atlantic. The Anishinaabe were given prophecies that predicted 7 stopping places. First they went to Montreal, then Niagara Falls, then Round Lake near Detroit, then to Madeline Island, and when the French explorers found them, they were at Sault Ste. Marie along the rapids. Now, they are gathered at Perot's Madeline Island, preparing for an invasion of the Sioux territory in order to find their seventh stopping place and their promised Turtle Island. And you believe the words of a skull priest? The migration is fact, but it took some convincing for me to believe the rest. The tale said that prophets came from the future to warn the Anishinaabe of what would befall them. Hundreds of years ago, these prophets warned them of a doom, and now, in the province of Acadia, those that stayed behind are being slaughtered to the last man, caught in a struggle between the French and the English. The strangest part of the legend, besides the ending, is that the people were told to search for cowrie shells, a type of white tropical snail that comes from the ocean, not the North Woods. The shells were left by these prophets to guide them on their quest. Until they found the shells, they stayed where they were, lost in a way. Hunters and boys knew what to look for, but you know how many islands there are in the North Woods. Are you saying they came here? Of course. Before the Petun came, the Chippewa dwelled here. But to prevent other hunters from wasting time, the scouts would mark a place, much like Darcy left his lead plate at the Haunted Valley. I'll show you. A short time later, the Siouxers stood in front of the cave. At the bottom of a large bluff, a smaller protrusion rose like a geological echo, and along the base where the rise met the island, a crease in the limestone had formed. Crouching, Le Sueur entered the space, and resting inside the shadows, a white skull caught just enough light to be visible. A skull priest left this here, and while it might look like an ominous warning, it is simply a confirmation that it is not the island described in their quest. The eyes, Gaspar noted. Cowrie shells. The skull priest called them migi shells, which they gather at stopping place, left by the prophets, if you believe the tales. The skull is left behind to tell the others that the island is not the one they seek. Right now, bottled up at the Apostle Islands, the skull priests wait to continue their search in the lands of the Sioux. Once they find their seventh stopping place, the only thing left will be determining the fate of the world. The apocalypse? Le Sueur scoffed. I've underestimated you. There are Christians in Montreal who attend Mass on a weekly basis that do not know the apocalypse the way you do. The Christian and Chippewa end times both involve sevens and a destruction of the world. But while the Bible focuses on an antichrist, the Chippewa account focuses on a hero who has the ability to prevent it. To defeat the coming darkness, the Chippewa hero needs two objects, a sacred shell and a water drum. I worry I may have found one of them already, but I do not know what to do. The Siouxer entered into the deeper recesses of the cave, finding the map Father Marquette had used years ago. The Order of Eos, the Jesuits, and the Chippewa all seek this, yet the Sioux fight to keep the secrets hidden. I swore an oath to avenge Father Marquette, but now my heart simply wants to return to the cabin I shared with Winona. What am I supposed to do? Gaspard did not answer, but spent several minutes looking at the map case. What are you thinking? Le Sueur finally asked. I wonder who made your map. Whoever made it certainly visited the Haunted Valley, Le Sueur said, and began to open the protective casing to show Gaspar. Together they looked at the artifact. Obvious exaggerations were made. A place where water flows in all directions, for example. The mountains, nothing but a steep ravine. The city and graveyard, just a solitary bluff. The residue, that seems to be the clue men seek most. But why? Which is why I returned for my samples. For my people, it is the stuff of legend, but it drove my mentor, Father Marquette, to seek the watershed described in this strange map. What I don't know is what Father Marquette would have done if he found it. Behold, I send to you out as sheep among wolves. Be as wise as serpent and as innocent as doves. The Great Spirit did not want Father Marquette to find it. Yet he has allowed you to know its location ahead of the wolves. Meaning what? Gaspar handed the map back to him. I am an old man, but you are young. When the Sioux tire, the wolves will return, and if you are among them disguised, you will know what to do is right. You will do what is right. I also knew Father Marquette, yet I do not know what he would have done. So the answer must be given to prayer. Is the object a catalyst of evil, or a weapon to be used against it? Having stood in the haunted valley with the Baron, the answer seems obvious, but the truth cannot be known until the moment arrives. A storm is coming, and I shall weather it with my people, knowing I have done all I could. But you must ride the crest of this wave until it crashes into shore. Gaspar and Darcy are my allies. Lesueur put the map under his arm. Then I'll go back to Montreal, and like a sheep among wolves, I'll try to understand who made the map and what the wolves plan to do. Chapter 57. Montreal, New France, Spring 1689. The shy girl Lesueur met a year earlier, now owned the streets of Montreal. Marguerite Messier reminded him of a tropical bird flying through the ugly city, and in every shop she sang a song about the owner. Upon her head she also wore something quite bird-like, even though he could not quite understand how the seamstress connected the feathers to the bonnet, or why she'd hide her golden hair under it. Around her delicate neck she wore a string of pearls, flaunting her wealth to the peasants as she walked past. Her pink jacket tapered at her slender waist, but the crimson and gold skirt ballooned out as she rode upon a cloud. When she took hold of his arm at the elbow, Lesueur realized he held a key to any door in the city. He, too, wore the clothes of the aristocrat, and the name Paul Bonjean passed farther into legend each time she introduced him as Monsieur Lesueur. How do you know this man again? Lesueur asked when his escort finally took a breath. Gaston? He's the clock merchant who caught my sister's eye. They've been married since you've been away. When your house is built, you should buy one of these clocks that stand as tall as a man. The foundation has not yet been laid, and she's already decorating. Is this what life in Montreal has in store for me? Gaston Verdy's shop was located 4 blocks from the river, on the corner of a quaint shopping district that didn't smell like horse and rotting fish. The din of ticking filled the space, as if stepping inside of a living thing. Wait until it reaches the top of the hour, Marguerite said. It is almost deafening. Marguerite, Verdy said from behind the counter. And who is this? Gaston Verdy did not have a lick of hair upon his head, but unlike older men, it appeared as if he shaved it on purpose. The slight stubble on his blocked chin and the lashes in his eyebrows had a few sprinkles of gray, but otherwise he appeared to be a man in his late 30s. The flavor of the week, she mused. Isn't he lovely? A bit old for you, isn't he? I am now 14. Lesueur almost shook her off his arm. He was so surprised. The way she had strutted around Longueuil, barking orders at servants and flirting with her eyes and grins, he assumed Marguerite to be much older. Even today, as they walked from the docks to the shopping district, she had given off the impression of a worldly woman, not a girl in woman's clothing. Excuse me, she said, letting go to rush over to the counter. While she pressed against the counter, resting on elbows as she teased the clock merchant, Lesueur scanned through the dozens of clocks assembled. Fool, you are twice her age. By the time he came around the corner, he could hear her reciting the biography of the shopkeeper. With all the unspent trading profits, he's building a 3-story brick home on Rue St. Paul. It will be a magnificent home right in the heart of the city. Montreal must be a strange sight after so much time on the frontier, Monsieur Lesueur, Verdy called out to him. Lesueur hastened his step and walked over to the counter. When the very air wants to kill you, it makes a man realize how small he is in the world. Looming over both of them, he held his breath as both waited for his next comment. Marguerite, help me pick a fine clock for my new home. Until recently, I've only used the sun. Do I have a budget? She asked with a devious smile. Once she had stepped away, Lesueur reached into the pocket of his vest, withdrawing a few sheets of charred paper. Strangely, books burn slower than an entire log cabin. I'm afraid the borrowed books are completely destroyed. How much do I owe you? Verdi studied the piece of paper with the singed edges. Any friend of Perrault is a friend of mine, Monsieur Lesueur. But I was told my books were being given to a man named Paul. Lesueur ignored the comment. I must say I found it strange when Perrault suggested such exotic reading, but to learn a lost lord from Artois was out on the edge of the world does make more sense now. The beaver, deer, and moose can only hold so much fascination, and then the mind turns to the greater mysteries of life. During my days as a trapper and trader, I found myself alone with my thoughts quite frequently. The books you loaned me were great companions during my solitary hours. Yes, before I settled here, I spent a few years traveling, but nothing as exotic as the edges of the frontier. As a young boy from Claremont, I dreamed of traveling the world like Marco Polo or Magellan. Alas, my inheritance only took me this far. I should have invested in pelts like you. Until this war with England ends, I've promised the Lemoyne family to stay here in Montreal to supervise the training of the militia. Then in a whisper he said, I understand you are just a clock merchant, but I was hoping to acquire more books on our shared interest. Alchemy? Verdi said in full voice and then cringed. Of course, I don't actually make these clocks. My clocks come from all over the world, which means I also have connections to books in all corners of the world. Then it looks as if I have a friend in Montreal, Lesueur said, turning back to Marguerite as the first clock reached the top of the hour, seconds ahead of the others. Then the entire shop erupted in a chorus of bells. She ripped off her hat as the sound bathed her. She spun in circles, letting her blonde hair flow like golden ribbons. When the ringing stopped, Verdi spoke softly. You are a lucky man, Lesueur. Lesueur could see the lust in Verdi's eyes, lust for the beautiful young maiden and lust for her family fortune. Even though Marguerite was old enough to court and marry, she was a child compared to the worldly and wise Winona. A lucky man? But is that luck good luck or bad luck? Chapter 58. Montreal, May 1690. Gaston Verdi held the straight blade delicately in his fingers and scraped it over his soapy scalp. Like a farmer carefully planting crop rows, Verdi held a steady hand for each pass until his bald head gleamed like polished stone. Rinsing the blade, he dried it and tucked it in his front pocket. Freshened for the events of the evening, he looked to the small clock in his bathroom, which indicated that it was still had hours before he needed to leave for the wedding at Longueuil Castle. He slipped on his dress pants and white shirt before walking over to his desk to finish his correspondence. To the eminent Monsieur Muscadet. Several months have passed since the shocking events of the massacre of Lachine, and despite the abrupt limitations of my investigation, my return to life as a clock merchant has allowed my investigation to conclude. As you are well aware from public and military reports, over 200 colonists lost their lives when an orchestrated Iroquois attack targeted the southern part of Montreal island known as Lachine. Unlike open warfare, this sneak attack involved more than 1,000 Iroquois who, under protection of night, surrounded the settlement and slaughtered the inhabitants by dragging them from their beds and executing them to the last soul. Governor Denonville received blame for his aggression against the Iroquois in recent years, and for his faults was replaced shortly after the massacre by the aging Frontenac. Almost immediately after striking at the heart of New France, the Iroquois sued for peace, which Frontenac quickly granted in order to focus on the English. The surviving Sachem hostages were returned, and now, with the coming of spring, both sides of the St. Lawrence River licked their wounds. After I volunteered with the local militia, serving under Pierre Charles Le Sueur, Commander Jacques Le Moyne marched through Iroquois territory unmolested to rout the English in what is now known as the Schenectady Massacre. With his return, I not only have a better understanding of our enemy, but also of the motivations for the attack on Lachine. The Iroquois were bribed to target the estate of René Robert Cavalier, Sieur of La Salle. As you know from my previous reports, La Salle is one of the 3 heads of the Order of Eos here in the New World. While news travels slowly in the vast continent of America, I do not believe they were aware that La Salle had been killed by mutineers. The massacre of Lachine effectively targeted the estate to kill La Salle, had he been there. This leads me to believe that the sleeping giant, the Priory of Ormus, has woken again in England and used one of its key pawns, the Iroquois, to eliminate the French threat of uniting the Mississippi River and the Gulf. Now, both the man and his estate have been cleared from the board. The affairs of the Jesuits and the Le Moyne family also have taken serious setbacks in recent months. Under the pretense of war with England, most traders were recalled to defend Quebec. But rumors come from the west that hordes of Sioux Indians have swept over the Mississippi River Valley and into the east, destroying every trading post and settlement in the Great Lakes region. A century of progress has been lost in the summer, and for the foreseeable future, the beavers are the only safe creature west of the St. Lawrence River. Finally, I write that I have been invited to celebrate a peculiar alliance. Pierre Charles Le Sueur, a celebrated coureur de bois, more man than myth, will today become part of the Le Moyne family through a wedding to my wife's sister, Marguerite Messier. The wedding will be attended by all the Le Moyne brothers, the reinstated Governor Frontenac, Intendant Calliere, and presided over by Bishop Laval. Luck has made Le Sueur a trusted friend of mine, and his strange courtship is not only with Marguerite, but with the entire Le Moyne family. If we survive the coming war, I believe Le Sueur has positioned himself as a primary person of interest. He will be watched closely. Your servant, Gaston Verdi. With his wife in the wedding party, Verdi sat alone at the wedding, watching all of Montreal from a table near the front. For bringing vital information about the Sioux and for helping rescue a besieged Fort Frontenac, Le Sueur's dowry had been 2 large land grants on the eastern shore of Montreal. The cost for the wedding had taken his flowing mane of hair along with his wild beard. But even neutered and civilized, Le Sueur was twice the man of any other standing in the wedding party. At the wedding celebration, Marguerite Messier giggled with her bridesmaids while Le Sueur drank heavily with the Le Moyne brothers, especially with Jacques Le Moyne, his former trade companion in the West. As a lowly clock merchant and part of the Montreal militia, Verdi kept his place and made notes of all comings and goings during the wedding. Despite the loss of La Salle, the Le Moynes found a new right-hand man for the West. For Le Sueur, his wedding to Marguerite made him an independently wealthy man. A strange marriage for a man suddenly obsessed with alchemy. What did he find out there on the frontier? The party had just gotten started, and with the toast, truth often followed. But instead, a cold bucket of somber water was thrown into the wedding feast when an officer came to collect Governor Frontenac, who left immediately. A few minutes later, Intendant Calliere was called away, prompting the elder Le Moyne to make inquiries. Soon the whole room stirred with whispered conversation, until the web brought vibrations to the lowly clock merchant. Port Royal and Acadia had fallen to the English, and Admiral Phipps now brought an entire English fleet up the St. Lawrence to destroy Montreal. Chapter 59, Quebec City, October 16th, 1690. Pierre-Charles Le Sueur stood up from his trench, and a shower of small pebbles and broken pieces of stone fell from his clothing. How am I still alive? Get down, you fool, Jacques Lemoyne hissed from his spot in the trench beside him. They've stopped shooting, Le Sueur explained. That is our fire. The 4 English ships parked in the harbor continued to prowl the deep waters of the St. Lawrence Channel, but their guns no longer flashed fire. Half a mile downstream, a single ship broke out of their pack of 30 English ships to begin heading toward the city. A moment later, the stone redoubts built along the city wall grew silent as those inside of Quebec noticed the same thing as Le Sueur. A flag of truce drew near. Perhaps they've come to surrender, Jacques smiled, dusting off the debris that had been blasted off the city's fortifications. Doubtful. While these 4 warships have done little to the city's defenses, those 30 ships anchored off of Beaupré have done more than enough to have enough men to overwhelm us. Phipps can afford to be patient. He's just testing us. So when the rowboat neared shore, Le Sueur greeted it himself. A British officer presented himself. I am Major Thomas Savage, and I have been sent as an envoy to deliver a summons of surrender to Frontenac. Surrender? Le Sueur laughed. I don't even think all of our stone redoubts have had a chance to fire yet. I spent much of the summer building them, and now you ask for this conflict to be over already? I'm disappointed in the fighting spirit of the English. Don't be a fool. We have brought 2,300 regulars. What do you have? Militia and wooden palisades? Le Sueur stepped forward, standing nearly toe-to-toe with the pompous English envoy. This is not Port Royal, sir, and those of us gathered here are not fishermen. Blindfold him. So Major Savage was quickly blindfolded, and with Jacques Lemoyne on one arm and Le Sueur on the other, the 2 men who secured the trench along the beach walked back into the city they defended. Quebec had been built upon Cape Diamond, a naturally strong cliff overlooking the river where 11 small stone redoubts had been built to keep the ships from landing. Along the docks there were 6 more 18-pound guns, as well as 8 guns mounted at Fort Chateau St. Louis, which housed the regulars. Even the windmill had been turned into a 3-gun battery, which is why all but only 4 of the most mobile English ships remained in the distance. An angry crowd, who had borne the brunt of the English cannons that fired wildly into the city, threatened to lynch the envoy. Despite the open hostilities they show, Le Sueur knew why the major had been sent, to scout the city's defenses. Although the streets had been barricaded and secured, Le Sueur knew they were little to no defenses on the northern side of the city, where only a wooden palisade met the woods opposite the St. Charles River. The longer the English scouts had, the more likely it would be that they found this truth. Le Sueur almost laughed when he opened the doors to the officers' quarters at Chateau St. Louis. The elderly Governor Frontenac dressed as if he were King Louis himself, and so did his officers, and even the clergy, Bishop Laval. But Louis Hector Callière still was not among them, something Major Savage would certainly note. Le Sueur pulled the blindfold off of the major's face, allowing him to see the rugged collection of voyagers filling the room behind Governor Frontenac. He wanted to speak to Governor Frontenac about surrendering, Le Sueur said about the slack-jawed English officer who could not mask his awe. Yes, Major Savage snapped back to his purpose. I am Major Thomas Savage, sent as an envoy by General Phipps on behalf of King William of England. I bring you this letter drafted by the Massachusetts Puritans. The war between the 2 crowns of England and France doth not only sufficiently warrant, but the destruction made by ye French and Indians under your command and encouragement upon the persons of the Majesty's subjects of England, without provocation on their part, hath put them under necessity of this expedition for their own security and satisfaction. Frontenac wrinkled hands began to shake. He took the letter from Savage's hands and tore it up right in front of the envoy. Sufficiently warrant? Perhaps we should treat our guests the same way the Seneca treated their prisoners at the fort that bears my own namesake. Lesueur, go light a fire for this fine Englishman. He appears to be cold. The major's red face suddenly turned white. Frontenac gestured so wildly that his wig became askewed from his head. On second thought, this man does not deserve the opportunity to prove his courage and medals in our fire. Hang him from our battlements instead. Governor Frontenac, Bishop Laval said aghast, this man is an envoy. For a moment, Frontenac looked like he might hang his longtime rival for questioning his word in front of the men. Or perhaps Frontenac expected the admonition? Tough word. Okay. I have no reply to make to your general other than from the mouths of my cannons and muskets, Frontenac finally conceded. Take him back to his ship. So Lesueur slipped the blindfold onto the relieved envoy and walked him back. On the way, he saw the bald head of Gaston Verdi, who now served as an officer in the city militia. Get some men to the north palisade, he said privately. Expect a sneak attack on the wall. Verdi's face grew solemn, and he nodded. Back on the riverbank, a few hundred militia had dug into the shore. So, Jacques said, perhaps your brother's fleet will come and rescue us, Lesueur added, as the envoy rowed back to his ship, because by tomorrow I feel we'll be neck-deep in English blood. But Pierre Le Moyne's little fleet did not appear the next morning. It had been sent back north to Hudson Bay to destroy English forts and posts, hoping to draw the English fleet away from the St. Lawrence. But the English had not taken the bait. The next morning, Phips's own flagship, the legendary Six Friends, joined the barrage of the city, firing pell-mell into it. Even as the cannonballs flew overhead, Lesueur could not help but watch the other 30 ships anchored off of Beaupré. Just as he anticipated, the English scouts learned the city was weak to the north, and despite the current bombardment, the bold English were not about to take the city with a frontal assault. Lesueur made his request. Jacques, let me take 100 of our militia and set up snipers along the western bank of the St. Charles. They're going to try to take the town from the rear. I just know it. Lesueur shook his head. Lemoyne shook his head. The St. Charles is our shield, not our weakness. They would need boats to cross the St. Charles. They are landing 1,000 men. They will keep pushing north until they can cross and then flank us. Just then, a cheer went up from the entrenched French militia. Phips's own flagship was struck by a well-aimed cannon, and with a groan of ripping wood, a large chunk of timber, including the massive English flag and ensign mounting, fell into the St. Lawrence River. The Six Friends continued to circle widely away from the city's defenses. Are you with me? Jacques Lemoyne asked with wild eyes. The St. Charles, Lesueur repeated. Jacques Lemoyne ignored it, focusing on the fallen English flag. We can fly it from our battlements and lure them in with it. Come, Lesueur. The next thing Lesueur knew, he, Lemoyne, and 4 others were running for the docks to jump into a canoe. With Lesueur seated in the stern and Jacques Lemoyne in the bow, the little canoe flew across the water faster than any of the 4 English ships could react. By the time the riflemen on the nearest ship even spotted them, Lemoyne had cut the flag free from the debris and dragged the sopping cloth around Lesueur's shoulders. Returning to their trench, Lesueur glanced down to the shallow waters off the coast of the city. Even if Phipps did foolishly decide to take the city with a frontal assault, the shallow waters would force a retreat. Major Savage had certainly seen this as he rowed to shore under the flag of truce. A moment later, the entire city cheered as Jacques Lemoyne waved the captured flag to inspire the besieged. Then suddenly, a hail of musket shots fired upon their position. This time, it did not come from the flagless flagship. This time, it came from across the St. Charles. The first few squads of redcoats set up along the eastern bank of the St. Charles, firing into the French militia entrenched along the exposed beachhead. Even though not a single Englishman had attempted to cross the St. Charles River yet, Lesueur knew he was trapped out on the beach. Jacques Lemoyne dropped the massive flag and hobbled quickly for the protection of the trenches. His bloody hands covered a wound to his left thigh. "I'll be fine," Lemoyne insisted with a smile, but the twinkle in his blue eyes showed fear. The two of them sat in a trench, waiting for an attack that never was going to come. 2 days later, Lemoyne could no longer fake a smile. Not that there was anything to smile about. Lesueur had been correct. Under the flag of Major Whaley, the English marched 1,200 soldiers from Beaupré to the shores of the St. Charles River. Twice the English attempted to cross in canoes and small boats, only to have their crafts destroyed by the heavy Canadian fire, forcing them to shift to the north. On the 4th day of the siege, Lesueur could smell something was wrong with Jacques Lemoyne's leg. "I need to get you into the city. These are my men. Your leg has rot. You should have listened to me earlier. You can't even stand, let alone lead these men." So using the captured English flag as an ambulance, 4 men carried Jacques Lemoyne into the city to receive treatment. Lesueur had just returned to the trench when he heard an English signal from across the St. Charles River. "They're going to try to cross," Lesueur shouted to his men, who all loaded their rifles in anticipation of the orders. As if rereading the end of a novel, Lesueur suddenly understood the facts a little better. Glancing up the river along the narrow strip of land between the wooden palisade and the shore, he saw a force of more than 100 English charging down the shore toward their trenches. Instead of attacking the weakest spot along the palisade, Major Whaley's flanking force chose to dislodge Lesueur and his men from their position to allow Major Savage to cross without opposition. To face the charge, Lesueur's men would have to leave the protection of the trench and reform in a perpendicular line. And if that happened, Major Savage's men would have them out in the open. If they stayed to shoot the boats crossing the channel, Major Whaley's men would pour right over them. Lesueur fired his rifle across the St. Charles and then grabbed 2 hatchets. "Follow me, men." But about the time he left the trench, a strange cry echoed in the woods along the eastern bank of the St. Charles. A Huron war cry. Lesueur had no time to think about it, nor did the charging redcoats of Major Whaley. In a matter of seconds, the two forces smashed into each other, giving the snipers on the other side of the river little time to pick off the French. Even though his militia was overwhelmed, their experience fighting Indians throughout New York and Ohio gave them an immediate advantage. But winning the moment didn't matter if Major Savage crossed the St. Charles. More Huron war cries filled the woods, and the English guns erupted in fire, but not towards Lesueur. No sooner did Lesueur's hatchet find flesh than he had to spin to catch another charging Englishman. While he'd bottled up Whaley's men and before they spread over the beach in front of the city walls, he knew it would only be a few more moments before Savage's men caught them from behind. And then a field cannon fired. But the bloody French militia and the English regulars paused as the explosion hit just yards from their position. "Collier!" a French sniper above the gate shouted. "Collier has come!" The field cannon had hit its mark, and half a dozen dead Englishmen bobbed along the splintered boat in the St. Charles Channel. A second cannon shot sent a spray of water, blood, and splintered wood into the air, causing all on the beach to flinch. And then terror filled the eyes of the Englishmen surrounding Lesueur. As soon as one turned to flee, a dozen joined them. And soon Lesueur found himself chasing after them along the narrow banks of the St. Charles. Leading the counteroffensive, Lesueur soon caught the slowest Englishman and sank his hatchet into the man's shoulder. The force of the blow caused the metal head to get lodged in the shoulder bone, knocking both men to the ground. His militia ran right past him as Lesueur freed the hatchet and brought it down again into the back of the man's head. In no imminent danger, Lesueur turned to make sense of the unexpected shift of momentum. Across the river, More than 100 Huron warriors crashed into Major Savage's force, who had also taken an entrenched position to parallel the river. A short distance upriver, a small squad of French Marines secured a spot along the eastern shore, which allowed them to place the field cannon to fire openly as the boats crossed the channel. But it wasn't Le Sueur's place to analyze the defensive strategies of the city. He had to catch up to his charging militia and keep them from walking right into a trap. As he ran north along the narrow strip of land between the city wall and the St. Charles, the palisade grew shorter and shorter, which is where he expected the English to attack. But before he could catch up to his entrenched men, he heard the sound he'd been dreading, a full volley of gunfire from across the river. Turning the corner, he saw his men gathered in mass. And across the river on the eastern shore, he saw another larger company of French regulars in firing formation. The 100 English regulars who'd bravely crossed the upper depths of the St. Charles to flank Le Sueur had been pinned. And volley after volley decimated their numbers until the survivors stopped running and sank to their knees in mercy. Le Sueur then recognized the insignia of the French company. So did his own men, who shouted, "La Hatton! La Hatton!" A small figure on a black horse came riding up to the French riflemen along the eastern shore of the St. Charles. Riding with Baron La Hatton, Le Sueur saw a red-headed ghost dressed in a uniform rather than the garb of a river guide. Philip Dubois? Captain d'Arcy took off his massive plumed hat and waved it in acknowledgement of the militia's chant, and then gave the orders for his troops to disengage and join Gaspard's Huron war party that was sweeping over Major Savage's failed crossing down the mouth of the St. Charles, leaving Le Sueur's men to finish off Whaley's flanking maneuver. The red-headed lieutenant, if it was indeed Dubois, charged into the woods after the British. Inside the city, Le Sueur heard the victory chant grow. La Hatton! La Hatton! Chapter 60. Cambridgeshire, England, 1691. Bernard Claremont knew why people stared at him. In centuries past, a newborn with his abnormalities would have been discreetly taken from the mother and pronounced dead. Fortunately, his nurse saw past his shrunken left arm and the mound of tissue upon his neck and shoulder to his perceptive eyes, and spared the newborn hunchback. Now, even the intellectual bullies of one of Europe's most finest institutions seemed to look at him and wonder, why were you allowed to live? Claremont kept his head down, watching his misaligned ankles trod toward the lecture hall. How can these intellectuals laugh and joke when we are losing the war? Yes, following the glorious Revolution, England had seen numerous victories. King William and Queen Mary quickly brought the strength of England into the global conflict, blocking the Catholic alliance of France and Spain. All this was known in the newspapers, but none of the smiling college students knew about the Order of Eos, the Jesuits, the Periphery, or even the Priory Vormis, who helped make the glorious revolution happen. Reaching the lecture hall, Claremont put a hand upon the corner of the building, looking both ways to see if he'd been noticed or followed. For several minutes he stood there, watching in both directions. He reached into his pocket for his watch, confirmed the time, and then walked into the back door of the lecture hall. A droning, raspy voice came from the front of the hall, but Claremont first noticed the empty lecture hall. Although seating would have allowed several hundred college students, only a dozen filled the vast empty space. The reason was obvious. Behind the lectern, the bushy-haired alchemist did not even notice a foreign hunchback join the class. And so, the alchemist would say every few minutes, bringing on a mathematical point that only he seemed to understand, There was no confirmation of understanding, no interaction with students, no visual aids, no written parallels, just a monotone, dull voice spewing numbers and theories. Of the dozen students, half feverishly wrote down every word by the rosy-cheeked professor, while the other half held their chin in hand, trying in vain to absorb the information. For another half hour, the lecture continued, with only the flipping of lecture notes providing a connection between teacher and pupil. The big finish was simply announced, and that is that, before the notebook was slammed shut, ending the lecture. 3 students clapped, while the others quickly bolted for fresh air. Sakar is right about him. He's a miserable teacher. Bernard Claremont rose to begin his careful descent down the steps of the auditorium. The notebook was being stuffed into a large satchel by the time Claremont reached the bottom of the stairs, and from his own jacket he produced the paperwork. "Professor," Claremont called out softly, "might I have a word with you?" An agitated face looked up, and even after studying the origins of the request, the expression did not change upon seeing his misshapen issuer. "Go ahead." "My name is Bernard Claremont, and I've been commissioned to help you with your transition. As your great English writer Shakespeare wrote, 'When troubles come, they come not in single spies, but in battalions.'" "Sorrows," the professor corrected him. "When sorrows come." "Ah, yes, but having studied your career closely, we felt it appropriate to modify the quotation to troubles, since your dispassionate demeanor rarely allows a change in status quo to be seen through the lens of emotion. We carry a battalion of troublesome updates, but only you can determine if the news is sorrowful." "We?" The professor crossed his arms and stiffened his back, suddenly looking down at Bernard from his angular nose. "Curious. Please go on, Mr. Claremont." "First, here are your traveling papers. We have a duplicate set since I will be at your side during the journey." He handed them over. It astonished Claremont what happened next. Whereas a normal man would begin at the top left and work his way word after word, line after line through the document, likely taking several minutes, the entire contents of the letter seemed to be absorbed in a single blink, allowing the retort, "Venice?" The war that has begun will only grow in the coming days, but the majority of the fighting will be in the Low Countries and Savoy. Despite the risks of sailing, Venice is the safest backdoor route. Claremont anticipated the next question and handed over the newest document. "I've been put on sabbatical?" "Yes," Claremont said, "saving your students also. You'll be paid. Your position as Lucasian Chair of Mathematics will be preserved, your absence at Parliament explained, and it will allow time for your travel and transition as well. A year from now, you'll be back here in your lecture hall pretending your life is still the same." This time, the alchemist's brow wrinkled as he slowly read the documents bearing King William's personal seal. While he read, Claremont offered disarming praise. "We are great admirers of your work. We have friends in the Royal Society who've provided us with copies of your writings." "You've read my work?" the alchemist asked, not with the tone of surprise, but of disbelief. "Mostly skimmed," Claremont admitted. "We are not concerned with the mathematical justifications of your findings as much as the precision of your finds, especially involving the study of comets. However, we are much bigger fans of some of the private works you've written." This time, the haughty professor seemed rattled as he read through the collection of documents. "I don't know what these are," he claimed. "We are friends and admirers," Claremont quickly reminded him. "We are not here to blackmail or take advantage of you. We have spent the past few years learning everything we could about you, including how you never had to take the oath, despite your religious views. While the world saw scientists, you lived in the shadow of profound religious vigor. While we do not share your beliefs, we respect how you were able to discreetly separate your public office from your private beliefs. But we have not come for those reasons, which would have certainly excluded you from office. We've come because of an entirely different matter. This time, Bernard Claremont produced a duplication of an ancient document covered in alchemical symbols. He kept it rolled up and in his hand. Perhaps you've read the news. Robert Boyle has died. We will spend your sabbatical year preparing you for the mantle of leadership. The flock is in need of a new shepherd. Bernard handed over the document, letting his words echo. Let's see how the alchemist reacts to this. The wrinkled brow relaxed, and the alchemist's eyebrows raised as his eyes widened. The blinking quickened. The math professor held the document up for a moment, as if to formulate a question, and then fainted. He understood the offer immediately. He's obviously the right man for this heavy task, Bernard thought before rushing to his side. Now, if we can only convince Isaac Newton to lead the Priory of Ormus. Chapter 61, Montreal, 1693. As Lesueur slept in his soft bed, the ceiling of his bedroom dissolved until every detail of the 3-story brick home, St. Paul Avenue, and Montreal vanished, leaving only the cosmos above him. Then one of the stars began to burn brighter, a pulsing white star in the dark cosmos, with a trail of blue and green vitriol streaming behind it. The Philosopher's Stone. His hand reached out to the heavens, seeing the stone coming right at him. The hurtling comet intensified, and soon he used his outstretched hand to shield his face from the blinding light, peering at it as it between the cracks in his fingers. Then a whisper, "Wish we, Winona." Her voice came from behind the comet, but the light blinded him from seeing her. "Where did you go, Wishwe?" He tried to explain, but the answer came out only as a grunt from his throat. Suddenly, the bright glow of the comet was doused, as if the shutter of a lamp had been closed, and the silhouette in the dark cosmos formed the shape of Baron Lahatan. The stars chanted, "Lahatan, Lahatan." As the dark figure's hand reached out, his fingers wrapping around Lesueur, pulling him away from the approaching comet. For a brief moment, though, Lesueur could see that the light was the soul of Winona. She was the comet. Her face filled the Philosopher's Stone with light. Then the stone returned to the dark cosmos, and despite all of his efforts, he was pulled farther and farther away, until she was only a tiny dot far off in the heavens. When Lesueur woke, it was the voice of Marguerite, not Winona, that welcomed to the present. "You were dreaming." She sat leaning against the headboard, a silhouette in the darkness. "I'm sorry for waking you." Her small hand stretched out and rested on his heart, her fingers combing through his thick chest hair. "I couldn't sleep. The baby kept kicking, just like my husband. Instead of a nursery, perhaps you can build a bedroom for me to escape a nightly barrage of feet." "What did you dream of?" "Winona." "I dreamt of the great comet," Lesueur admitted. "The what?" He took a breath to explain, only to realize she would have only been a child when it came last 11 years earlier. 11 years. By now, the great comet had returned to the depths of the cosmos, taking Winona with it. Lesueur knew what he had to do, but like Marguerite's fingers, life entangled him with duty and obligation. "Lay back down. I promise no more kicking." She slid back down from the headboard, and he wrapped his arms around her swollen belly, feeling the kicks of his unborn child as he drifted back to sleep. The great comet and Winona were beyond his reach, but one part of his dream remained within his grasp. The next morning, after Marguerite served him breakfast, Lesueur put on his jacket, walked down to the ramparts for updates from the militia sentries, and then took a detour to a clock shop. In the past 3 years, Gaston Verdi, his brother-in-law, had become one of his favorite friends in Montreal. The bald clock merchant became his primary aide during King William's War, organizing the resources for the defense of the city while Lesueur commanded the men in times of crisis. With the Lemoyne brothers and Collier keeping the war away from the heart of New France, both Verdi and Lesueur were able to return to civilian life, with the city no longer in immediate peril. With bells announcing his entrance to the shop, Verdi waited behind the corner. "Ah, Pierre, I was just thinking of you. One of your suppliers has news of the world?" Yes, quite a bit actually. More than we could have discussed at supper tonight. Have a seat. I'll lock the door and put out the close sign so we can discuss matters. Lesueur watched as the chubby merchant ran around the counter, locked up, and then rushed back. "So, what is it?" "First," Verdi said, reaching under the counter, "this arrived for you. Despite the war, I have a friend in Boston, a professor by the name of Josiah Farrow. On this side of the hemisphere, he might be the closest thing we have to an expert on occult matters, especially alchemy and the Philosopher's Stone. It seems as if an American alchemist requested some old text to be sent through Farrow, only to have the ship seized by the French Navy. His loss is your gain, and since I know this is a hobby of yours, I figured I'd let you study them before I ransom them back to Professor Farrow." "How considerate of you," Lesueur said, lifting the haul of books. "An American alchemist." Irenaeus Philothades is obviously a pseudonym, but it seems as if he's a person of renown in the colonies. You have a rival, apparently. Tell me, Pierre, do you think the Philosopher's Stone can really turn lead into gold? Lesueur chuckled dismissively. "If it did, I'd be able to keep up with Marguerite's ambitious spending." Verdi's smile lessened. "Alas, I have other news as well. Your efforts in organizing the militia here in Montreal have not gone unnoticed. Although it's not official, Governor Frontenac has decided it is time to rebuild our trade posts in the West. But the Sioux, they've withdrawn to a defensive position, leaving the Great Lakes and the Ohio River valleys open again. You'll be sent to Perot's old outpost to assist Etienne Delhut." "At the Apostle Islands?" "Yes, Delhut has managed to maintain the La Pointe post through all the turmoil. But you'll be sent to try to broker a peace with the Dakota." "Marguerite is almost to term." "Yes, well, it is unofficial at the moment. And perhaps they only wait for your child to be born as a courtesy to you. I just wanted you to let you know what I've heard. There are other news as well. The hero of Quebec has worn out his welcome." Baron Lahoughton. Lesueur returned to the conversation he'd had with Gaspard following his escape from the fires of Kiaxa. His hated enemy had turned into an unexpected ally. "I thought Captain Darcy was making plans to return to France with his Marines." "It was the plan, but before reaching the ocean, he came across an English force attacking Plaisance. Baron Lahoughton swept in, crushed the English, and for his efforts was made Lieutenant Governor of Placentia." Although Gaspard had explained the purpose of the Baron, the appearance of Dubois had not been explained. "What about the redhead that was with him?" "Baron Lahoughton has sent his men back home, just as he promised Governor Frontenac, leaving Gaspard as my ally. Apparently, Baron Lahoughton was upset that you were being assigned to the frontier instead of him. He wants the honors of becoming the Warden of the West, so that he could go after the Philosopher's Stone himself." Their plan was unraveled. That man sabotaged our defenses in the West. Ah, don't be so hasty. Don't you see what happened? By rewarding him with the lieutenant governor position, they've separated him from his men. Now he's vulnerable. The Lemoynes know the truth about him. I think Frontenac finally believes you. Don't worry, that loudmouth braggart won't last long in Placentia. There are rumors that he's already stolen the virginity of Governor Brouillan's daughter. He's more than just a lying scoundrel. Lesueur stopped himself short of telling his brother-in-law more. What aren't you telling me, Pierre? Is it possible? Did Dubois betray Marquette? Is he sabotaging Lahontan? The redhead that Lahontan sent back is Philip Dubois, a former companion of the Jesuit missionary Jacques Marquette. Captain Darcy stayed in Placentia because he expects to receive reinforcements. And when that happens, he'll sail right past Placentia, Quebec, and Montreal and into the heart of the West. I don't understand why he would do that, Verdi said. I believe he means to make himself governor of Louisiana Territory, and the man who controls the Mississippi River will be the most powerful man on the continent. I see, Verdi said, nodding. Then he snapped his fingers and pointed. Now that the St. Lawrence is open again, I planned a business trip east. I'll visit Fort Plaisance and let Governor Brouillan know about the ambitions of the young baron. You would do that. Our young wives make us brothers, but we know we'll be peasants in the eyes of the Lemoyne family until we make something of ourselves. Ridding ourselves of the baron helps us both. I'll let Governor Brouillan know what we think of the man wooing his daughter. Gaspar had counseled him to lay low and let Lahontan make plans for a return to the Haunted Valley. Yet he still didn't trust Lahontan, and an opportunity to return to the frontier changed everything. Lesueur picked up the stash of books and left. Perhaps there is still a chance I can return. Chapter 62, Chester, Acadia, 1693. Gaston Verdi was not used to killing in public. The glow of the rising sun cast only a dull light upon the black blanket of night, allowing them to see only shadows of the French fishing village of Chester. They just missed capturing Baron Lahontan near Moncton the previous evening, and with an arrest warrant in his pocket from the Placentia governor, Verdi did not hesitate. Spread out through the village and assume they are all guilty of harboring our fugitive, Verdi ordered as the horses caught their breath on the ridge overlooking Mahone Bay. Try to avoid killing anyone, but do not hesitate to use violence to get answers. Lahontan is hiding somewhere in this village. At most, there were 20 houses, even if not all of them met the European standard of being a house. With a dozen hired men, Verdi chose to watch from the ridge as his men tore into the silent village. Moments later, shouting, crying, and screaming filled the air as the fishing village bore the public brunt of de Brouillan's wounded pride. The fall of the young hero had come suddenly. Even after his victories during the Battle of Quebec and the defense of Plaisance, the haughty young baron could not keep his rude mouth shut nor his aristocratic prick in his pants. Without aristocratic support, a death warrant for treason was issued. Now, instead of young Darcy meeting an untimely death, Verdi would kill him for all the world to see. A whistle echoed from the village, and the brutes converged on a single little stone house near the docks. Verdi lashed his horse and rode down to investigate. "Did you find him?" Verdi hopped off his horse. The men guarding the door hesitated, which instantly concerned him. "This is too easy. Something is wrong." When he walked through the door of the sturdy little house, he found 3 of his brutes with guns drawn on Darcy, who sat with his back to the door facing the red coals of a fire. As Verdi drew closer, he could see the truth. Dressed in the baron's finest clothes, a full-size mannequin sat with its feet propped up on a little ottoman. Verdi felt the hair on the back of his neck rise. When he stepped out of the stone fishing village, he could see the glow of dawn already giving clarity to the island-filled bay that widened to the Atlantic. But it wasn't the glow of the eastern sun that caught his eye. It was the flash of light on a darker western shore. A dozen cannonballs flew over the west village of Chester seconds before the sound of the thunderous volley filled the air, only to be replaced by chaos. They are targeting us, Verdi realized, knowing that the lit cottage served as the bullseye for the village of Chester. Behind him, the stone cottage exploded into shards of timber and stone. Across the bay, a cloud of smoke masked the source of the sudden attack. But then, from out of fog and smoke, a tall mast and sail floated out like a ghost. Then two shorter masts also emerged. It was a pirate ship. A crew of 100 men busied themselves at the cannons and sails as the orders from an unseen captain echoed across the orders. "Send my regards to the governor," Darcy's voice shouted out from across the smoky water. But Verdi could not spot his prey amongst the busy crew. He was too distracted by the flag on the rear of the pirate ship. Captain Crapo, loyal to the highest bidder. When we meet again, I will not bother bidding.